The jungle was alive with whispers. Leaves rustled, heavy with the weight of secrets. Every evening, just before the sun dipped below the horizon, a woman dressed in flowing white would step into the dense thicket. Her footsteps light, deliberate. She never looked back. The villagers had noticed. At first, they thought nothing of it. Maybe she was collecting herbs. Maybe she needed time alone. But as days passed, the visits grew longer. She would disappear before dawn and return only when the sky was painted in the last shades of twilight. Her hands were sometimes smeared with dirt, her clothes dusted with the scent of the wild. And then, one night, a child saw her. Hiding behind a tree, wide-eyed, breath held tight in his chest. He watched as she stood in a clearing, her hands reaching out toward something large, something moving. The boy couldn't believe his eyes. There, standing before her, was a massive gorilla. The woman smiled. She spoke in hushed tones, her fingers tracing the rough fur of the creature's arm. The gorilla did not flinch. Instead, it reached for her, a strange understanding passing between them. The boy ran back to the village, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could. He had seen something that no one was ever meant to see. By morning, the village was buzzing. People whispered in huddled groups, eyes darting toward her home. The elders called for a meeting. Questions hung heavy in the air. Why was she going into the jungle? Why was she with a beast? What was she hiding? Then the rumor spread. A secret ceremony. A woman, standing in a circle of stones, whispering words only she and the gorilla could understand. A union that should never have happened. Amina had married the gorilla. The village erupted. Shock turned to anger, anger to fear. They demanded answers. Some called it madness. Others called it a curse. And as the truth unraveled, one thing became clear. This was no ordinary love story. It was something else entirely. Before we go deeper, make sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories from the deepest part of the human core. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. But this was only the beginning. What followed in the days ahead would leave the village shaken forever. Because when humans cross lines that were never meant to be crossed, there is always a price to pay. Amina was a striking young woman, her features a perfect blend of grace and strength. Her dark eyes seemed to hold a quiet intelligence, and her soft, warm smile could charm even the harshest of critics. In the village, she was well known, not just for her beauty, but for her kindness and intellect. Raised by her father, a respected man of faith, and her mother, a loving yet firm woman, Amina was taught the values of tradition and duty from an early age. Life was simple, structured, and predictable. Nothing could prepare her for the pull of the wild. The village she called home was nestled deep in the heart of the jungle, a place where ancient trees whispered stories of old. Life was quiet here, away from the chaos of the outside world, where the rhythm of time followed the seasons, the sun and the moon. In such a place, the rules were strict. Women, especially those of Amina's age, were expected to marry young, raise families, and carry the weight of their culture's expectations with grace. And yet, even with all the expectations placed upon her, Amina had always been different. She wasn't rebellious, but she had a quiet fire within her. She was always curious, asking questions that were often deemed inappropriate by the elders. Why must we follow these rules? What if there is more out there? What if there is something we don't understand? She didn't mean to challenge tradition, but her mind was restless, searching for answers beyond the boundaries of her village. And so, the jungle, with its mystery and ancient allure, became her refuge. Every day, after finishing her duties, Amina would slip away from the prying eyes of the villagers. She would walk through the dense undergrowth, her feet light on the forest floor, the scent of wet leaves and damp earth filling her senses. It was here, in the shadows of towering trees, where she first saw him. At first, it was just a brief glimpse, an enormous creature moving between the trees. Amina had been startled, but there was something about him. His eyes, dark and deep, held an intelligence that mirrored her own. The gorilla didn't run from her. Instead, it paused, as if studying her, before disappearing into the thicket. The encounter left her shaken, but not frightened. She returned the next day, and the day after that. Slowly, over time, she learned to observe him from a distance. It was clear that the gorilla was no ordinary animal. His movements were deliberate, graceful even. There was something deeply human in his gaze, an almost understanding that Amina couldn't ignore. She didn't tell anyone. Who could she tell? The village would never believe her. They would say she was crazy. Days turned into weeks, and Amina found herself drawn back to the jungle more and more. She would bring food and leave it near the edge of the forest, watching from afar. The gorilla began to trust her. He would come closer, first cautiously, then more boldly, taking the food she offered. His fur was coarse but beautiful, his eyes intelligent but sorrowful, as if he knew something that Amina didn't. And one day, when she found herself sitting on a rock near a clearing, the gorilla approached her. Amina's heart raced as the creature slowly, carefully, sat down beside her. She could feel the weight of his presence, the power in his massive frame, but instead of fear, a strange calm washed over her. She spoke to him softly, as though speaking to a friend she had known her whole life. She told him her hopes, her dreams, her fears, things she could never speak aloud to anyone else. He listened, his deep eyes never leaving hers, as if he understood every word. And it was then, in that quiet moment, that Amina realized something. She wasn't just talking to an animal. There was a bond forming between them, something that transcended the natural world. She didn't know how it happened or why. It just did, but she couldn't stay forever in the jungle. The village would soon notice her disappearances, and the rules of her life, so carefully constructed, would fall apart. She had to leave. But leaving wasn't an option. Not when the bond between her and the gorilla had grown so strong. And so, Amina made a choice that would change everything. She began bringing him food daily, meeting him in secret, until the day she made the unimaginable decision to marry him. In the stillness of the jungle, with the stars as her witness, Amina became his and he hers. They exchanged vows in their own language, a language formed not of words but of understanding, of shared moments, of an unspoken connection. But the villagers had no idea. They couldn't know. How could they? Amina's disappearance into the jungle each evening was not just a simple escape. It was a ritual, a marriage that no one, not even she, could explain fully. But no one knew the extent of their relationship. No one knew what had truly transpired in that jungle. The moment the villagers found out, it would be too late. This secret, this forbidden bond, would soon tear the village apart. And in the days that followed, Amina's life, and the life of the gorilla, would be changed forever. Days turned into weeks, and the villagers began to notice that Amina was no longer the same. She had always been the girl who was willing to lend a helping hand, the one who would always smile when greeted, the one who was quick to follow the rules. But now, she was different. The hours she used to spend at home, tending to her family or helping the village, were now spent elsewhere. It was as if she had disappeared into the jungle for longer stretches of time, disappeared into the dense, shadowy green where no one could follow. Her family grew concerned. At first, they thought nothing of it. Maybe she needed time to herself. After all, everyone needs a break from the routine of village life. But as the days went on, their worry grew. Amina would leave in the late afternoon and return only after the sun had set, her eyes hollow, her body covered in leaves and dirt. She began bringing food, fruits, nuts, and even freshly prepared dishes and clothes into the jungle. But why? What was she doing with those things? It made no sense. The villagers started to notice. Her once frequent visits to the village slowed. Her lively chatter with neighbors ceased. They began to whisper among themselves, exchanging looks of confusion and suspicion. Something wasn't right. What was she hiding? Amina's father, a quiet but proud man, became the most concerned of all. His daughter had always been honest with him, obedient and respectful. He trusted her. But now he could feel it in his bones. Something was wrong. He knew his daughter wasn't going into the jungle for simple errands. He'd asked her, but Amina would only give him vague answers that didn't sit right. "Just a little walk, father, to clear my mind," she would say, her voice distant. One night, as the moon cast long shadows over the village, Amina slipped out again, unaware that someone had begun to follow her. A young villager, curious and suspicious, decided to trail her at a distance. He watched as Amina walked with purpose, carrying a bundle of food in one hand, a neatly folded piece of cloth in the other. His heart began to pound as he followed her through the thick underbrush, the rustling leaves and crunching branches beneath his feet sounding like gunshots in the otherwise still night. He wasn't sure where she was leading him, but his gut told him he was about to find out something that would forever alter his understanding of reality. The air grew colder as they neared the clearing, and the sound of movement grew louder, as if something or someone was waiting. When they reached the clearing, he saw it. Amina stood in the center, her arms raised, her voice soft, almost as if she were singing. And in front of her, the gorilla. The same massive creature he'd seen before, his fur thick and dark, his eyes glowing with an unsettling calmness as he stood there, almost regal in stature. The young man froze, his breath caught in his throat as he watched the scene unfold before him. Amina, the beautiful daughter of the village's respected leader, was standing before the gorilla, performing what looked like a ritual. A ceremonial exchange, a strange union. She wrapped a piece of cloth around the gorilla's arm, her movements graceful, as though she had done this before, as though this was her place, her destiny. The young man's heart raced as the air around him seemed to thicken with each passing second. His hands trembled as he raised them to cover his mouth, desperately trying not to make a sound. He could hardly believe his own eyes. Amina, the girl he had known all his life, was marrying this beast. The scene before him was nothing like he had ever imagined. The bond between them was undeniable. There was no fear, no hesitation. Only the quiet certainty that this was a sacred moment. Amina leaned forward, her forehead gently touching the gorilla's. The gesture was intimate, familiar. She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. She wasn't just offering her love. No, this was something deeper. Something that spoke to a connection beyond the realm of the natural world. The young man stumbled backward, his mind racing. He turned and ran, his legs carrying him back to the village as fast as they could. The truth, the horrible, unthinkable truth, was now in his possession. He had seen something no one was ever meant to see. The news spread quickly. Whispers turned to shouts, and the once peaceful village was thrown into chaos. Amina, the sweet girl who had once been the pride of the community, was now seen as something else, something dangerous. The elders gathered in an emergency meeting. The village chief's voice trembled as he spoke. What has she done? What curse has she brought upon us? It wasn't just the sight of Amina's actions that shocked them. It was the implications. How could she marry a creature of the jungle? What did it mean for the village? For their traditions? Their very beliefs? The villagers were torn. Some wanted to confront Amina, to drag her back to the village and force her to explain. Others feared the anger of the gorilla, whose strength could easily overpower them. Some spoke of punishment, of what had to be done to restore balance to the community. But one thing was certain. No one could remain indifferent to this revelation. And when the village found out, when they learned the full extent of Amina's secret, they would stop at nothing to stop her. The pursuit of Amina and the gorilla would soon take a terrifying turn. The jungle, once a sanctuary, was about to become a battleground. What happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the natural world. The pursuit of Amina and her gorilla would soon escalate into something unimaginable, and the villagers, in their attempt to protect their way of life, would not realize just how far they were willing to go. The news of Amina's secret marriage spread like wildfire, its flames licking at the hearts of the villagers. At first, there was silence, a heavy, oppressive stillness, as if no one could believe what they had heard. But soon, whispers turned to open accusations, and the village that had once embraced Amina as a daughter, a symbol of beauty and tradition, now turned against her. The elders, the very people who had once guided the village through every storm, were the first to react. In the center of the village square, they gathered, grim-faced, their robes heavy with authority. The chief, a stoic man known for his wisdom and fair judgment, stood at the forefront, his voice trembling with anger as he spoke. This is no longer a matter of tradition. This is madness, witchcraft. He paused, as if considering his words carefully before continuing. Amina has defiled us. She has betrayed the village, her family, and our very beliefs. This unnatural bond with a beast cannot be tolerated. The air around them was thick with tension. The villagers, once devoted to their faith and their customs, now looked at one another with confusion, fear, and disgust. Some muttered under their breath, speaking of curses, of demons, of spirits that had taken hold of Amina's mind. "She's possessed," one woman whispered, her voice shaking. "The jungle is feeding on her. It's not her anymore." Others were less subtle, their voices rising in anger. "She's bringing doom to us. If we do not stop this now, the jungle will consume us all." As the elders continued to argue, a wave of fear rippled through the crowd. The village was about to lose something precious, something fundamental. They couldn't understand it, and they were terrified of what they didn't understand. A plan was formed in a rush of fear and fury. The gorilla had to be dealt with, removed from the jungle, hunted down before he could bring any more chaos to the peaceful village. Men with spears, their faces grim, set off into the jungle. They were determined. They believed that the gorilla was the source of the evil, the catalyst for Amina's descent into madness. It was an attack on their way of life, and they had to restore order, no matter the cost. But as the villagers set off into the jungle, Amina, unaware of their intentions, hurried toward the clearing where she and the gorilla had once shared their vows. She felt a strange unease tug at her chest. Something was wrong, but she couldn't place it. Perhaps it was just the weight of the village's growing suspicion pressing down on her. Or maybe it was the knowledge that she could never escape the inevitable clash between her love for the gorilla and the traditions of her people. As she stepped into the clearing, her heart sank. The gorilla was there, waiting for her, his dark eyes calm and patient as always. But there was something else in the air now. Something foreign, something dangerous. The sound of footsteps reached her ears, sharp and fast, like the beating of a drum. Her body tensed, her instincts screamed at her to run, to protect him, but it was too late. The men with spears emerged from the trees, their eyes wild with fear and determination. They saw Amina standing there, arms outstretched, a pleading expression on her face. But their eyes were not focused on her. They were trained on the gorilla, whose massive frame loomed in the clearing like a giant. He bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Amina stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong as she shouted at them to stop. "No, please stop! He is not a monster. He is mine!" But the men paid her no mind. Their faces were hard, their judgment clouded by fear and anger. They raised their spears, the metal gleaming in the fading light. Amina rushed forward, her hands reaching for the gorilla, her voice breaking. "Please, don't hurt him. He is my husband. I swear it." The men hesitated, but only for a moment. They were too afraid, too consumed by the need to eliminate the threat they saw in the creature before them. And then, with a terrifying roar, the gorilla charged. Amina cried out, but the villagers were ready. The first spear struck the gorilla's shoulder, drawing blood, but it only enraged him more. He roared again, his massive arms swinging, knocking men to the ground. His rage was overwhelming, unstoppable. But as he defended himself, Amina found herself caught in the chaos. She screamed, trying to reach him, but the villagers pulled her back, away from the danger, away from the man she loved. She fought, but they were too strong. The men dragged her to the ground, forcing her to her feet. Her eyes locked with the gorilla's one last time, and in that moment, she saw the pain and confusion in his gaze. He didn't understand why they were doing this. He didn't understand why they wanted to tear them apart. "Let me go!" Amina screamed, her voice raw with desperation. "You don't know what you're doing. He's not a beast. He's everything to me." But the villagers ignored her pleas. They dragged her back toward the village, away from the clearing, away from the love she had fought so hard to protect. Her heart shattered with each step, knowing that the gorilla was now a hunted creature, no longer a symbol of her love, but a target. But what the villagers didn't know, what they could never have anticipated, was that the gorilla was not as helpless as they thought. As they took Amina back, defeated and broken, they had no idea what they had just unleashed. The gorilla, wounded and betrayed, would not simply fade away. No, he would fight for his life, for Amina, and for the bond they had formed. And the village would soon discover that when you push nature to its limits, there are consequences. The tension in the village grew unbearable. The days following the attack in the jungle were filled with whispers and glances over shoulders. The fear of what they had provoked, the anger of the gorilla, the strength of his primal rage, was palpable in every corner of the village. But worse than that, there were strange things happening. Things that couldn't be explained by any logical reasoning, no matter how hard the villagers tried to dismiss them. At first, it was subtle. Livestock began to disappear. The villagers thought it was just the work of predators, wild animals that roamed the edges of the jungle, desperate for food. But as more animals vanished, the suspicion grew. What animal could take an entire cow in one night? Who could drag it off without leaving a trace? And why were the animals so eerily quiet in the days leading up to their disappearance? Then came the children. Late at night, they would wake up screaming, their small bodies trembling in terror. "It's him," they whispered. "The gorilla. He's coming closer." The stories the children told were chilling. They spoke of hearing deep growls echoing through the trees at the edge of the jungle, sounds that shouldn't have belonged to any creature they knew. They said it was the voice of something angry, something that had been pushed too far. And that voice, it haunted their dreams. Amina, once the bright, hopeful girl the village had known, was now a shell of the woman she had been. She hadn't spoken since the men dragged her away from the gorilla. She refused to leave her room. She refused to eat. Her family, desperate to get through to her, would find her staring out of the window at the jungle, her eyes hollow, as though her soul had left her body and wandered into the wilderness with the creature she had married. There were murmurs that she had lost her mind. Some said she had gone mad from grief, while others whispered more ominously, could it be the work of some dark spirit, a curse placed upon her by the jungle itself? They could no longer tell where the girl they once knew had gone. What they did know was that the village was falling apart, and they had to do something about it before it was too late. And so it came to pass that the village chief, once a man of reason, now consumed by fear and desperation, called for a council. The time had come, he said. The gorilla had to die. The village could not afford to let this menace roam free. A great hunt would be organized. Spearmen, archers, and trackers would set off into the jungle at first light to find and kill the beast that had terrified them all. But as the days passed and the hunt grew closer, the fear only deepened. The villagers began to hear rumors that made their blood run cold. Some said they had seen shadowy figures watching them from the trees at night, the unmistakable shape of the gorilla's massive silhouette looming in the darkness. Others spoke of strange sounds in the jungle, the trees creaking, the ground rumbling, as if something enormous was moving just beneath their feet. Despite these rumors, the chief was resolute. He called for the hunt to proceed. The gorilla, he said, was a threat not just to their safety, but to their very way of life. Amina had to be forgotten, her love for the creature seen as nothing more than a tragic delusion. She was no longer a member of the village. She was an outcast, a victim of her own choices. The villagers rallied behind him, their fear of the unknown turning into an anger they could no longer suppress. But the night before the hunt, just as the moon hung high in the sky, casting its silver glow over the village, a feeling of unease settled over the entire community. Amina's family had locked her in her room for fear that she might run back to the jungle, to the gorilla who now haunted their every thought. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the gorilla had been watching them all along. That night, as the village slept, a strange disturbance roused the sleeping inhabitants. The ground began to shake. At first, it was a slight tremor, something that could have been dismissed as a passing earthquake. But then it grew stronger, the earth beneath their feet vibrating with a deep, resonating growl that seemed to come from the very heart of the jungle itself. People awoke in a panic. Children screamed. The village chief, his face pale, gathered his men, but no one knew what was happening. They looked to the jungle, where the shaking seemed to be emanating from. Something was wrong, far more wrong than they had ever imagined. Then the howls began. Not the familiar growls of the gorilla. No. These were different. They were deeper, more guttural, as if something larger than any beast they had ever known had awoken. The sounds came from all directions, from the trees, from the earth itself. It was as if the jungle itself was alive, as if it was trying to tell them something, trying to warn them. Amina, hearing the commotion, stirred in her room. She rose from her bed, her eyes wide with understanding. She knew. She knew what had been awakened, and she knew there was no turning back. For as the sun began to rise the next morning, the villagers found something they hadn't expected. The jungle had changed. The trees that had once seemed still and silent now appeared to have shifted, their trunks twisted in unnatural ways. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the sounds of the forest were muted, replaced by a low, ominous hum. Something, or someone, was moving through the jungle, and the villagers could feel it. The village chief gathered his men, ready to set off on the hunt, but there was a sense of dread hanging over them. They knew they were walking into something that could change everything. What had they truly awoken? And would they be able to survive what came next? But just as the villagers prepared to head into the jungle, something unexplainable happened. The ground beneath their feet shook once again, and in the distance, something massive moved in the trees, casting a long shadow over the village. The gorilla had returned, but this time, he was not alone. The morning of the hunt dawned with an air of dread that had settled over the village, a feeling that refused to lift no matter how hard they tried to dismiss it. The villagers had armed themselves with spears, bows, and other crude weapons, their eyes sharp with fear and determination. The jungle, once a place of awe and wonder, had become a dark, menacing force, a place where no one felt safe anymore. The village was on edge, waiting for the inevitable confrontation with the gorilla they had been hunting for days. But when they arrived at Amina's home to check on her one last time before they left, they were met with an unsettling sight. Her bedroom window was wide open. The shutters banged softly in the breeze, and her bed, once neatly made, was disturbingly empty. Amina was gone. The news spread quickly, sending ripples of shock and confusion throughout the village. Amina, who had not spoken in days, who had been locked in her room under the watchful eyes of her family, had vanished. Her family was frantic, calling her name, searching every corner of their house and the small plot of land surrounding it. But there was no sign of her, not even a trace. The village chief immediately organized a massive search party, setting out into the jungle at once. Amina had to be found, he insisted. What if the gorilla had taken her? What if she had run away in fear, lost in the wilderness, unable to find her way back? There was no time to waste. The jungle, which had once been a silent witness to Amina's love and sorrow, now seemed to swallow the search party whole. As they ventured deeper, the thick canopy of trees blocked out the sun, leaving them in perpetual twilight. The air was heavy with an eerie stillness. No birds sang, no animals stirred. It felt as though the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to make the next move. The villagers were no longer certain if they were searching for Amina or for a monster, something larger, more menacing than they had ever imagined. The deeper they went, the stranger the signs became. Broken branches, torn leaves, the unmistakable scent of something wild and untamed, lingered in the air, but there was no sign of Amina. Then, just as they were about to turn back, one of the men in the party called out, his voice thick with horror. "I found something," he whispered, his hands shaking as he pointed to the ground. At first, no one could make sense of what they were looking at, but as the searchers gathered around, the shape became clearer. There, in the soft earth, was a massive footprint, one that could only have belonged to a creature of unimaginable size, a gorilla's footprint. But that wasn't the worst part. Lying beside the footprint was a piece of fabric, Amina's dress, ripped and torn as though it had been caught on something sharp. The fabric was stained with something dark, something that looked far too much like blood. The villagers recoiled in shock and confusion. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Had the gorilla taken her? Had the love that she had once shared with the creature turned to something darker, something more violent? Or could it be that someone else, someone from within the village, had taken her? Had she been abducted, either by the creature she loved, or by someone with a more sinister agenda? The air was thick with uncertainty. The villagers, now more afraid than ever, looked at one another with suspicion. How could they know the truth? Could the gorilla have killed her? Could Amina, desperate to escape the madness of the village, have run off into the jungle, seeking refuge with the one creature who had never abandoned her? Or was something else at play here? A darker, more calculated disappearance, orchestrated by someone who knew the jungle and its secrets all too well. The villagers continued their search, combing through the undergrowth, calling her name, praying for any sign that would give them the answers they desperately needed. But every step they took felt like they were walking deeper into the unknown, a place where the truth was slipping further from their grasp. As the search party scoured the jungle for any further clues, the village chief gathered his council, their faces grim and uncertain. Some believed that Amina had run away, either driven by grief or madness, and had disappeared into the jungle to escape her family, her village, and everything that had torn her apart. Others believed she had been taken by the gorilla, by the jungle itself, or by something far more dangerous that they couldn't even begin to comprehend. The villagers were torn, their minds clouded by fear and speculation. But as night fell, a chilling thought gripped them all. If Amina had been taken by the gorilla, would they find her alive? Or had the jungle claimed her too? Some say she ran away, escaping into the jungle, seeking freedom, peace, and perhaps even a reunion with the gorilla. Others say she was taken, perhaps by the gorilla, perhaps by something darker, something they couldn't even begin to fathom. But one thing was certain, the search for Amina had only just begun. And the deeper they went into the jungle, the more the line between reality and nightmare seemed to blur. What happened to Amina? Was it the gorilla who had taken her? Or was there something far more terrifying lurking in the shadows of the jungle? And as the villagers search deeper, will they uncover the truth? Or will they become part of the mystery themselves? Days turned into weeks, and yet Amina was nowhere to be found. The jungle had swallowed her whole, leaving behind only questions that tormented the villagers day and night. The massive search party had yielded nothing but more confusion. The torn piece of fabric, the gorilla's footprint, the trace of blood. It was as if the jungle had offered them just enough to know something terrible had happened, but not enough to understand what it was. The search had officially been called off. The elders deemed it futile. "If she is alive," they murmured, "she does not wish to be found, and if she is dead, the jungle has claimed her." But even as the villagers tried to return to their normal lives, something had changed. Amina's presence, or perhaps the ghost of it, refused to leave. It started with whispers. Late at night, when the fires in the village had burned low and only the sounds of insects filled the air, people began hearing voices. A woman's voice, faint, almost like a sigh carried by the wind. Some swore they heard their names being called, only to turn and find nothing but the darkness of the jungle staring back at them. Others claimed to see figures at the edge of the trees, shadows that moved unnaturally, disappearing the moment anyone tried to approach. And then there were the dreams. Children woke up screaming, crying about Amina standing outside their windows, her eyes hollow, her lips moving without sound. Parents whispered to one another about their own dreams. Visions of the jungle at night, of eyes staring at them from the canopy, of Amina walking barefoot through the trees, her white dress trailing behind her like mist. Amina was gone, and yet, she wasn't. As the weeks passed, the villagers, desperate for answers, began forming their own theories about what had truly happened to Amina. Some believed that Amina had staged everything, planted the torn dress, the footprint, even the blood, to throw the villagers off her trail. Why? Because she had no intention of staying in the village. She had chosen the gorilla, and to be with him, she needed the world to believe she was gone. The believers of this theory insisted that Amina was still out there, alive, living deep within the jungle, that she had abandoned everything, her family, her people, her past, for the one creature she had ever truly loved. At night, when the jungle was at its quietest, they said you could hear her laughter hidden within the rustling leaves, her voice carried in the wind. But if she was alive, why had she never returned? Then, there were those who believed that the gorilla was not natural. The way he seemed to understand Amina, the way he protected her, the way he reacted when the villagers came for him, it was too human. What if he was something else? Something ancient, something beyond the realm of human understanding. Some whispered about old legends, stories passed down through generations about spirits that lived in the jungle, beings that could take the form of animals, watching, waiting, testing those who wandered too close. What if the gorilla wasn't a gorilla at all? And what if Amina, willingly or unwillingly, had been taken into that world? A darker theory spread among the villagers, one that sent shivers down spines and forced people to lower their voices when they spoke of it. What if Amina never even made it to the jungle that night? What if someone from the village, had taken her before she ever had the chance to run? After all, her actions had shamed her family. She had defied the elders. She had broken traditions that had stood for centuries. There were those who believed that Amina's own people had silenced her, that the story of the gorilla was nothing more than a distraction from the real crime that had taken place, the crime of a young woman who had dared to love something she was never meant to love. Was it her own family, the village elders, or a scorned villager who saw Amina's love as a betrayal? And if so, where was her body? But perhaps the most terrifying theory of all was the one no one dared speak aloud, that the jungle, the same jungle that had witnessed Amina's love, her sorrow, her defiance, had taken her for itself. When she disappeared that night, she hadn't been running. She had been called, and she had answered. The village never truly recovered from what happened to Amina. Some left, unable to bear the weight of the mystery, the fear that lingered in the air like a curse. Others stayed, but never spoke of it again, pretending that if they ignored the past, it would simply fade away. But there were always those who remembered. The ones who still, late at night, heard the soft whispers of a woman calling from the trees. The ones who saw shadows moving where no shadows should be. The ones who, no matter how many years passed, could never shake the feeling that the jungle still watched them, waiting, listening, and maybe, just maybe, calling for the next one. What do you think happened to Amina? Was this a tragic love story of a woman who abandoned everything for a creature she truly loved? Or was there something else at play, something the village was never meant to understand? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you think this story was chilling, wait until you hear the next one. Time passed, seasons changed. The village tried to move on, but Amina's story never faded. There were no answers, no closure, only whispers carried by the wind, only questions left hanging in the thick, humid air of the jungle. The search had long since been abandoned. Her family, once desperate for her return, no longer spoke of her. The village elders forbade her name from being uttered in public. Children were warned never to stray too close to the jungle's edge. Yet, despite every effort to erase her from memory, Amina's presence never truly disappeared. For years, strange happenings continued to torment the village. Fishermen, returning from the river at dusk, claimed to see a lone figure standing at the edge of the jungle, her white dress billowing in the wind. There one moment, gone the next. Goat herders whispered of hearing soft singing coming from the trees, a woman's voice, melancholic, distant, before the jungle swallowed the sound whole. Late at night, when the village was silent and the fires had burned low, some swore they heard footsteps circling the huts, stopping just at their doorsteps, before vanishing into nothing. And then there were the dreams. It started with the children, waking in the dead of night, screaming about the woman with no eyes standing outside their window. Parents dismissed it as nightmares until they, too, began dreaming of Amina. She stood in the jungle, barely visible in the moonlight. Her face was turned away, her body still. But when they tried to move closer, to call her name, she would turn, and in that moment, the dream would end. The elders feared that whatever had happened to Amina had not ended with her disappearance. The jungle had been disturbed, And it was not finished yet. Some families left, packing their belongings in the dead of night, vanishing without a word. Those who stayed never spoke of Amina, never acknowledged the strange occurrences, never questioned the whispers at their doors. But the jungle knew, and when the moon was high and the night was still, it was said that if you listened closely, truly listened, you would hear it. A voice, soft, calling, waiting. Was she truly taken by the gorilla? Had she chosen to disappear into the wild, forever leaving behind the world of men? Or had the village itself been responsible for her fate, covering up a truth too dark to face? Or was something else at play? Something that had always been watching from the shadows of the trees. Something that was still watching. To this day, no one knows what happened to Amina. The only thing left behind was a whisper in the wind, a rustling in the trees. And on some nights, when the moon is high, villagers swear they see shadows moving, watching.